what Solars offers in ADSP or DSP program. And then we walk over some more details into the adverse event reporting processes for the newcomers who have never worked in pharmacovigilance industry. And then we kind of go through the actual modules that are offered by Solar step by step. And also kind of at the end of the session, we are open to the audience and ask a Q&A session, which will be very informal, and you can ask all possible questions you have in mind. So thank you for joining. Can you just enlarge the screen a bit, Bhavna? I don't know if I
Yeah,
can do
that's
it from my end. That'll be great. Thank you.
I think that would be it.
That's the max. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So as I said, I've been in the
Bhavna, you can
industry.
present the screen. I'm sorry, Bhavna, you can present present the PowerPoint presentation. There's a icon given on the below. Near the minus sign, there's this icon. You can present the screen. Yes.
This one, no?
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Bhavna. So again, just go over, we'll go with the advanced drug safety pharmacovigilance information session in terms of the graduation certification program and thorough, followed by some just a brief overview of the MS program that we also offer for students who want to do an advanced proper master's certification in drug safety and pharmacovigilance. And if you have any questions about the admissions criteria, tuitions, or any logistics information, please reach out to the admissions team. They have been very helpful. You can always email or call them at the end of the session or in the next couple of days. So next slide, please. So the next slide is basically just a little introduction session about myself. I like to provide because I came from a non-experience in no certification in pharmacovigilance. So I've done my medical residency from India, and followed by that, I got into the pharmacovigilance program. And back then, we never had these kind of certification programs. So this is all the new students are actually lucky to have these sessions that are offered by Solars. I did get into the industry as a drug safety associate to begin with, which is a very typical standard entry level position in pharmacovigilance. And it pretty much carries the routine in individual case data entry. And that's what is expected for people who are new to the program or who want to get into the advanced ADSP. If you have already some level of pharmaceutical experience in any other field like compliance, audit, or any other scientific field, you can always make that change as long as you have a bio-life science degree. So my journey has been pretty much standard. I began with a drug safety associate position, grew into a scientist, a typical medical reviewer role, because the expectations from a medical reviewer role is a physician who can assess, who can write, and you can actually do the assessment in terms of whether the drug is causing the adverse event or not. And that's why the medical reviewer role becomes a very critical in pharmacovigilance. A majority of, I would say 80% of the medical reviewers in pharmaceuticals do, the requirement is to have a formal MD degree. There have been some companies who do offer even nurses or PhD candidates to do medical reviewer for non-serious cases. So grew into the industry from a typical drug safety role to a medical review role, and now I've been kind of in a senior director in a more senior leadership position. So it took almost 15, 16 years for me to get to this level. But there's a lot of opportunity out there. I enjoy what I do. If you have a passion for pharmacovigilance, I think this is the way to go. So with that said, we'll go over more into details into the adverse event reporting and what is the actual responsibilities that you'll be required to do as a drug safety associate level. Next slide, please. So, in terms of the background of Solars, as you all know, this was founded in 2007 with the primary objective of training individuals in occupational programs in the field of clinical research, drug safety, and clinical data science. And our philosophy is to provide quality training programs in high demand and high growth industries to equip students for the success. Next slide, please. And the synopsis of the ADSP, which is the Advanced Drug Safety Pharmacovigilance Information session. It comprises of drug safety and PV overview. We will speak about the eligibility criteria. There is a curriculum that is further detailed into the next few slides. We do offer career services where there are an in-house contact who will help you to build up your LinkedIn resumes, who will also go through your resumes to line up with the expectations of the role, and they will also assist with job and placements to a certain extent. Next slide, please. So in terms of drug safety and pharmacovigilance, basically the adverse event reporting is an FDA mandated process and expectation from any pharmaceutical company, regardless of the size of the company. And we are focusing for this curriculum purposes, we are focusing on the medicinal product. So there are vaccines, there are biologics, there are cell therapies, and there are all possible other things that are mandated by the FDA and that may default to the adverse event reporting. But the medicinal products, there's a specific guidance by the FDA in terms of the adverse eventing reporting processes. And again, this pharmacovigilance not just applies to the United States, it's a global mandatory process. So even if you are working in the US, but if you're working for a company based in Europe, you will be following the US regulation, I mean, the UAE regulations as well as, and also you'll be submitting reports in the US because you're marketing in the US. So it depends on the territory where the medicinal products are marketed and distributed. So understanding the operational aspect of drug safety and pharmacovigilance in a nutshell and its impact on labeling, consumers, healthcare providers, and on public health. Also, you'll be collaborating because, adverse event reporting is very closely interacting with the regulatory department, which is actually the primary source of communication with the FDA. So you'll be collaborating with the other departments like pharmacoepidemiology, preclinical department, regulatory, medical affairs, risk management, clinical development teams. So depending on where your product is in the phase of clinical trial or whether it's after approval. So there are two categories of pharmacovigilance reporting. The product could be in different stages, still in the clinical trial phases, but you would still be obligated to be reporting the adverse events for that product. And eventually, once the product comes in the market, you would still have the obligation to report these adverse events. So the safety surveillance continues throughout the life cycle of the product. So the basic knowledge of the cycle of the drug development, disease process, drug to drug, pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamic interactions is very critical because you're dealing with drugs. So every drug has a unique mechanism of action. It has a specific chemical formulation. So understanding the content, understanding the chemical entity, understanding what kind of side effects to expect with that class of products is very important, like antibiotics or anti-infectives or asthma drugs or dermatology drugs, maybe. So those kind of knowledge and having a scientific degree, I think that really helps a physician or a nurse or a PharmD candidate to assess and understand the chemical profile of the drug. Also, knowledge of the good clinical practice, ICH guidelines, FDA regulations, as they apply to clinical as well as post-marketing sites, it's very mandatory. So that is actually going to be a core curriculum for this ADSP course. Also, knowledge of the standard components of an ICSR. So when I say ICSR is a very standard terminology that's used across the board, any pharmaceutical company, it's called individual case safety report. So there are 4 criteria that fulfills an adverse event to begin with. So you got to have an identifiable patient, you got to have a reporter, you've got to have a drug, and you got to have an adverse event or a sign or a symptom that, and this, as long as you meet the four criteria, it qualifies for an adverse event. And that's when the reporter is obligated to report these into the safety database, or at least communicate to the drug safety department to process these cases. So understanding what comprises of an ICSR report, also coding of these adverse event reactions. So you could receive a report for a symptom of swelling, pain, fever. So all these events need to be coded as per the drug safety database dictionary, which will further, we'll go over that specific MEDRA coding that is very mandated by the FDA and the EU regulations. Also ensuring complete causality assessment, which again, as I said, you're assessing whether the as adverse event or a sign or a symptom is actually related to the drug or not. Also identifying the potential confounders. When you say confounders, that means what are the other possible attributing factors to the adverse event, or what are the other comorbidities, like any other underlying disease, underlying concurrent condition, or any other drugs that could have contributed with the drug-to-drug interaction causing the adverse event. So those kind of assessments are considered to be critical when you do the medical review and the causality assessment. Can you scroll down a bit? I think the last bullet is not noticeable. Okay, so these are the basic things that are critical for the basic pharmacovigilance process understanding. Next slide, please. So in terms of the prerequisites, when it comes to case assessment, I think you need a very strong medical clinical expertise in pharmacovigilance risk management, and that comes over a period of time. You could be new to the industry, but as long as you have a strong clinical background and you can assess the relatedness, you know the drug well, you know the basic chemical profile of the drug, you're able to do that assessment. Also, the basic life science degree, as I mentioned, any medical, nursing, or pharmacy degree is a prerequisite for professionals to get into this field. Also, any kind of previous biotech, pharmaceutical experience, or any medical writing experience is definitely going to help you to grow into this industry. Next slide, please. So, in terms of the key activities, I'm speaking to the operational part of pharmacovigilance, which is a very basic day-to-day activity that takes place within any pharmacovigilance department in any ordinary company. Basically, there is a timeline where these cases come in, and that's called the clock start date. As this is a compliance-driven industry, it really matters when the case was received in the pharmacovigilance department. Now, typically, all these incoming cases, they come either via mail or fax or email. So as soon as they're received, they're logged in by the pharmacovigilance department, and these are the senior drugs. This could be a role of a senior or a drug safety associate, basically, to log in and the time received stamp on these adverse event reports. Also, to these reports can come from different uh, people like consumers, they can come from business partners, they can come from clinical trials. They could also come from the FDA or any other regulatory authorities or any publications or literature that was published recently. So there are a lot of sources how these adverse events could come to the pharmacovigilance unit of a department. Now, once they are received, they are logged in, which is the case receipt uh, in the middle column. And then these are again the drug safety associates' responsibility to receive these cases, stamp them, ensure that they are, and then the next is going to be the triage. The triage team is basically going to look for the four criteria for the adverse event. So as long as the case meets the four criteria of the adverse events, the case will get pushed forwarded for case entry. At the triage level, you also assess the seriousness of the event. So let's say it's a headache or vomiting, it's a non-serious, but if the patient has gone to the hospital or was admitted to the hospital because of vomiting, diarrhea, then it becomes a serious case. So that triage is a very important critical activity. And again, it can be done by the physicians as well, or it could be done even as a drug safety associate. So it depends on the way the structure of the pharmacovigilance unit is at a specific pharmaceutical company. And the triage will assess the seriousness of the case, and based on the seriousness of the cases to get expedited. So if it's a serious case, it'll get processed faster. The non-serious case have a timeline under which they can be processed. So once the triage is performed, then it goes to the data entries. Data entry is again a basic role of a drug safety associate or a specialist, where you will be collecting all the information on the adverse event form, and you'll be entering this data into a very compliance-driven Oracle drug safety database, which is again you're going to get access to the database. You'll be having a formal training into this database, which is going to be Argus, which is a very standardized database and easy to navigate. And that's where the majority of this data entry is done for all these adverse events. So all the adverse events are going to be captured into the database. And once the information has been captured in the database, it goes to the next level, which is the medical reviewer uh, role, who will be actually looking into the case and assessing the causality of the case, looking at to make sure that all the important critical information from the adverse event form was captured within the case, or if any information is pending or needs to be asked, they will be generating queries. So in a nutshell, the data entry is basically speaking about the adverse event like a story, like a narrative, where they'll talk about X and X person experienced vomiting on so and so day after taking so and so medication on so and so date. And they'll be talking about in terms of the reference of the time of onset of the adverse event to whether the current status of the adverse event is, whether it's ongoing, whether it's resolved, or whether it's improved. And then they would talk about whether the drug was interrupted or whether the drug was stopped. So there are a lot of details around the adverse event. And you're talking about, I was just mentioning about one event. Some cases you may find multiple events, so that becomes a complex case. So the more the adverse events, it becomes more complicated cases. And there could be some adverse events where there could be some non-serious and there could be a mix of serious events. So it is basically writing a clinical story of the adverse event. And then subsequently, the case after the medical reviewer has done their review, it'll go to the next level, which is the final case review, which actually does the QC of the case. They will do a quality check on the case. They will ensure that the medical reviewer has assessed the causality of the case, has checked the labeling for the product, whether the event is labeled in the drug product information sheet or not. So the overall last step is going to be the case reviewer step. If there is any correction, it goes back to the medical reviewer data entry. And then later the case goes to the next level, which is the submission. And nowadays, most cases, almost everything, all the cases are electronically submitted to the FDA database. So submission is the last stage. So within this entire step of case processing, there are a lot of detailed activities that is required. And that's where a senior drug safety associate or specialist or a medical reviewer get involved. So in terms of the ICSR aggregate reports, aggregate report is another separate entity in pharmacovigilance. On a day-to-day basis, the individual case entry completion falls under the operational part. And there's a second piece of pharmacovigilance, which is the aggregate report, which is a more consolidated, elaborative report that goes out to the FDA or the regulators on a routine basis, like a 6 month or a year or a 3 year. And it does take a lot of effort. It takes a couple months to prepare these reports. And that will be eventually a second step ahead once you're comfortable with this individual case level entry. Also, the signaling is a very huge, important part of pharmacovigilance activity, which is mandated by the FDA, where the FDA or the regulators want to ensure that each company is also looking into their database to find any unexpected signals. That means some events that are not in the label of the product, but they could be associated with the drug. So that's called safety surveillance, where the PV colleagues are proactively looking into their own database to see if there has been increase in a spike of cases, for example, diarrhea with a certain product, and they find a number of cases and they try to compare and see that within a couple months they've seen a lot of spike in these cases. That's where they'll start digging into these individual cases of diarrhea to see if there is any causality assessment or causality related to the drug itself that they may have to put that in the label eventually. So signaling is a third important part of pharmacovigilance, and there's a separate signaling team within every department, which again can be your advanced role once you feel comfortable with the daily case processing. So at the end of this operations part, the cases do go to the submissions team. They get submission in bulk to the FDA, and the FDA receives it right there. Once these cases are submitted to the FDA, if there is a safety data exchange agreement document for the specific compound, they have to be distributed to the business partners or other manufacturers, which is again a very mandatory process on behalf of every company. So then these reports get cross-submitted to the business partners as well. So that's a basic pharmacovigilance process in a nutshell. I tried to keep it short and concise. And at the bottom, I do have some nomenclatures, which is very much used in the standardized formation, like ICSR labeling, benefit risk assessment. So basically, pharmacovigilance is only, in a nutshell, can be also be comprised of risk management, where you are actually looking at or identifying early onset of risks that are related to the compound. So all these PBERs, yes, URs, these are the names of the aggregate reports, and you will eventually get comfortable once you actually understand what stage of a compound and how it's nomenclatured. So next slide, please. So the important part skill set that is important for this pharmacovigilance, just like any other department in, let's say, in marketing or operational or clinical development, in pharmacovigilance, I think the most important skill set is analytical and assessment skills, where you're analyzing the data, you are understanding the story the way it's presented, and you're making your own clinical assessment judgment at the end of the day to understand whether your drug caused the event and what are the possibilities that your drug could cause this event, or what is the possibility or probability, or do you think this is a early signal that means your label needs to be updated with this risk. So those kind of skill sets are very important. It comes with practice. Obviously there's some level of data entry into this individual case entry review. There is quality control, there's coding required, there's workflow, report reproducing procedures, E2 submissions within validated safety databases. As I mentioned, most majority of the companies all across the globe are currently using Argus, and some companies do use Arity, and there could be some other in-house databases which are could be familiar with Argus and Arity, but 80% of most of the companies currently are using Argus or kind of migrating to Argus eventually. Also, Medra is the dictionary where you will be looking for the coding when you actually do the data entry. So when you receive an event on the adverse event, you are mandated to use a specific code or the closest term to the reported event. And that is the reason the regulators came up with this Medra dictionary, where you will have access to the dictionary and you will be able to pick up the right code. Also, knowledge of the components of the causality determination, as I mentioned, when you're doing the causality determination, and this will actually default by to the physicians who are on this call, who will be actually doing the medical reviewer piece, they will actually have to review the case in terms of the onset of the drug, onset of the signs and symptoms of the event, also considering whether the events resolved after discontinuation of the drug. So they'll have to look at the positive re-challenge, de-challenge information. They will have to look at the age of the patient. They'll need to look at the other contributing factors, just like you would look at the medical history of the patient that could be also attributing to the event. So those kind of factors are very important. And also looking at the class of the drugs that you're dealing with. If they have a similar event reported in some other labels in the same class of drug, that means this could be like a class effect for that specific compound. Also, understanding the knowledge of the study protocols, SOPs, IB, investigation brochures. So, in clinical safety, when the drug is still in the clinical trials, the labeling document is called investigational brochure, versus if the drug is in the post-marketed study, that means the drug has been approved and is marketed. The reference safety information is also called the product's package insert or RSI for that particular product. In order for you to grow into the PV team, if you want to get beyond medical reviewer into a senior manager level or senior leadership team, you got to have a strategic thinking and decision making skills, performing timely coordination of safety information, taking ownership, good organization skills, which is actually critical in any level in pharmacovigilance, ability to follow written documentation in support of the PV activities, including SOPs, safety management plans, and working instructions. So a lot of documentation that's required in pharmacovigilance. So there'll be a lot of reading, there'll be a lot of proactive thinking. You'll be working on protocols. You'll be assisting with the reference safety information depending on the demand of the team. Next slide, please. And then obviously you have the communication skills, just like anywhere, a place of work, ability to communicate effectively in written and verbal communication, communication with the adverse event reporters and investigative sites. So if you're dealing with a clinical trial, you'll be actually speaking to the clinical monitors for any follow-up information, because many times the initial information could be very limited. So in order to understand what's happening, you will have to follow up with the clinical monitors. For that, you'll be speaking to them live on the phone call and trying to get the information that you're seeking for to complete the case. Also, ability to work as a team, because as I said, pharmacovigilance cannot exist by itself. You will be collaborating with the regulatory department, you'll be collaborating with the clinical monitors. If you are in a clinical trial setting, then you'll be working with the development teams, the medical writers for aggregate reports. For that, you really need to have the mindset of working in a team or even working as independently as required. Being compliant and understanding the urgency of the adverse events, it's very critical, and also ability to work in a fast-paced environment and attention to detail. Next slide, please. So in general, as I mentioned, pharmacovigilance is one part of the responsibilities, and then along with pharmacovigilance is risk management, and they both comprise set of PV activities and intervention designed to identify, characterize, prevent, or minimize the risks relating to medicinal or therapeutic products, including the assessment of the effectiveness of the clinical interventions and combination therapies. So risk management is another one step ahead, a very unique area, territory, I would say, under the umbrella of the pharmacovigilance. So in order for you, any of you who would be interested to get into risk management, you will have to preliminary go through the pharmacovigilance, training, and then only those, because very few products have a risk management program, and that's where you gain this experience. So eventually you will be working with some companies who will have a risk management plan or who will have a REMS in the US. That's what it is. And that's where you'll understand the responsibilities that go along with this. Also, the concept of pharmacovigilance and its significance enhances the impact of pharmacovigilance on the patient welfare and public health. To know what pharmacovigilance is, and the pharmacovigilance legislation gives an outlook on the rules and laws to follow in pharmacovigilance practice healthcare system. So, as I mentioned, pharmacovigilance role has become very crucial, and it's important to maintain the safety data, detection, and evaluation of the drug safety signals through manual or medical device reporting. And pharmacovigilance scope also deals as ecopharmacovigilance of pharmacoenvironmentology and pharmacovigilance in herbal medicines. So there's a lot of scope of pharmacovigilance. As I said, it's this expanded not just to medicinal product, it goes all the way to vaccines, herbal products, it goes to biologics, it goes to cell therapies. So the more exposure to you get to different faculties, it's going to be really helpful for you in your personal growth. Next slide, please. So in terms of the market analysis, the global PV market is expected to reach USD 10.27 billion by 2025. And so as of December 31st of 2020, the FDA has received almost 8,294 thousand serious adverse events. So you can see how many reports the FDA receives on a regular basis, depending on the number of companies that are based in the US. So there has been a lot of proactive reporting by the healthcare providers because the FDA database, FDA website actually gives you an access to the MedWatch program where you can actually voluntarily report an adverse event on the database on the actual website. So this adverse event reporting has been very proactive, and the number of cases continuously start increasing, and that's where the FDA keeps monitoring the drugs in the market. And you've seen a lot of legal issues as well if this process is not complied by. So again, just to highlight, this is highly compliance-driven industry. No one single late case is acceptable by the FDA. The company can shut down, the PV department can shut down, the drugs can be taken off the market if the critical assessment or the causality assessment of the event is not correctly assessed by these manufacturers. Next slide, please. So in terms of the advanced ADS, which is also called the ADSP course, it comprises of 300 hours. And now I'm going to walk through the different modules and what's included actually in the curriculum to begin with. So the DSP 601 is basically an introduction to drug safety and its regulation. And this is one of the module that's going to be included in the curriculum. It highlights basically a very basic drug development process, which you've probably read in your college degrees. It's just a refresher speaking about the preclinical research, clinical trials on humans, and then what happens next steps about the steps of obtaining regulatory approval to market. So this module is basically going to educate the students about the basic process of drug development and the regulatory compliance processes that ensure consumer safety. And it's divided into three macro modules. One is the drug development process, one is the ethics of human subject protection, and the third one is the good clinical practice and clinical trials. Next slide, please. So the next topic is the aggregate reporting. And again, aggregate reporting is one of the heavy tasks in pharmacovigilance. So the rules that are going to be generated once you graduate of this programs, they are going to expect you to have some basic understanding of what aggregate report is. And if you have the knowledge, it really helps for the people who want to hire such individuals. So as I mentioned, aggregate reporting is a very important task, mandatory task, and it's regulated by the FDA, and any regulators uh, are seeking to see this report. It's a consolidated, extensive report. It's like a periodic report, which is established on a periodic time that the market manufacturers are obligated to submit to the regulators. And this course is going to highlight, go over the cumulative and part of this aggregate reporting into details where it's going to speak about the safety assessment of these drugs. And it also involves the compilation of the safety data for a drug. Sorry, this is the definition. Aggregate reporting involves the compilation of a safety data for a drug over a prolonged period of time, months or years, as opposed to a single case reporting, which I described earlier. So the learning outcomes of this is it's split into 45-hour modules, split into 20 hours of theory that's going to focus on post-marketing regulatory, uh, that is the scientific committees and EMA and safety reference labels, and then also on the PSUR and PADA, which is the terminology for this aggregate reporting. And there are different sections of this PBER and PADA that they're going to walk you through individually. And also they're going to describe about the preparation of these reports. There's also 20 hours of hands-on using in Argus Safety that focuses on um, how to generate these line listings in order to prepare these uh, aggregate reports. Also, this hands-on training is going to focus on how to summarize tabulation of ADR, that's the adverse drug report, cases in Oracle safety database, and content and preparation of these reports, country-specific requirements, and guidelines governing periodic reports. So there are also some guidelines that go along for this aggregate reporting. So it's very mandatory and it's important and very helpful to have this information at hand. So if you have this experience, it's going to really help uh, down the road in your first hire or whenever you get into try to get into the industry. Next slide, please. The next is the DSP 602, which is the again, this is one of the very standard modules, setting module, and it's a very basic, speaking about the ethical issues of a business and medicine. And it is again divided into three macro modules. One is the ethics, honesty, and business dynamics that play understanding how the drug safety department is configured, and also training and drug safety career for new hire. So there are some going to be some very easy basic modules within this ADSP, and there is more specific modules that is really targeting the key roles like ADR reporting and aggregate, and we'll go more into the ADR in the next few slides. Next slide, please. The DSP 603 is the regulatory compliance for drug safety and pharmacovigilance. So this is basically going to talk more into the pharmacovigilance and the regulatory needs, the US FDA regulatory scenario for many people who don't know how the FDA is structured and what are the different departments within the FDA that actually look into these medicinal product category, and also go over the Europe, ICH, SIAMS, and international regulatory scenario. Next slide, please. 604 is again going to be a very important key curriculum which speaks about the adverse event reporting and post-marketing activities. And this is where this module is going to analyze the adverse events and explain ADRs in relation to the drug consumer. And this module further addresses the knowledge and methods of evaluating, reviewing, and analyzing these reports. So the topics covered in this session will include the following: adverse event reporting and post-marketing activities, adverse event evaluation, which I spoke earlier, seriousness, expectedness, and causality, understanding the role of MedWatch form. So MedWatch form is a very standardized form, which is a requirement which gets automatically generated once these cases are processed within the safety database. And you will see this MedWatch form eventually, and you will learn about it more into detail. And also the importance of the patient reporter details in the ICSR, the importance of event details in the ICSR, and the importance of product details in the ICSR, the dynamics of reporting, need to follow up and completion of reports, and importance and significance of voluntary reports. So this module is basically very, very important for the ADSP course. Next slide, please. The 605, again, a very critical introduction to the Argus database, which is an Oracle-based Argus Safety application. We do have an in-house Oracle database, which you will get familiarized with. You will have an internship program where you will actually be dealing with live cases. So the topics, this will actually, this module is basically going to speak about the thorough case processing and discussions, which will allow the students to gain skills regarding handling different types of cases. Because as I mentioned, the cases can come from different sources, literature cases, they can come from clinical trial, they can come from spontaneous, they can come from a consumer case. So depending on the origin of case, you will be exposed to all different scenarios of cases within the software, and it'll also be the highest possible quality standard to support accurate detection and analysis of drug safety signals. So the topics covered in this session include the following: training students on Oracle database itself. The training will include all aspects of validity, assessment, case triaging, case processing, and periodic and expedited reporting. And it will also give you hands-on experience on working on WHO drug dictionary and medical dictionary for regulatory activities, which are designed for the specific use of sharing regulatory information for human medical products and are helpful in the coding of adverse drug reactions, adverse drug experiences, and drugs in Argus safety. So this is one of the very important topics that you will be covering in the ADSP. Next slide, please. The 612 is now going to be the internship, which is in addition to the previous topic. So we already spoke about the prerequisite for the ADSP courses is healthcare and allied fields. And this program supplements the training provided to the students in the Oracle Argus Safety Application course. So the purpose of this internship is to expose the students on the job experience, where the students are given an opportunity to work with live cases. This experience is very unlike a classroom setting, as the students do not have access to these cases before the class. And it does enable the students to virtually experience the challenges faced by drug safety specialists in this field. So as I mentioned, you'll be have you'll have 24-hour access to this database once you're done with the Oracle Argus Safety course, and you will have access to a number of cases where you can actually do data entry, and it's like a similar environment that you would work as a senior drug safety associate or a junior safety associate in any pharmaceutical world. So it really gives you an ability to work in a similar environment in a comfortable setting where you will have access to n number of cases. You can do data entry, make mistakes, you can refix those cases. So it really gives you a good challenging environment to analyze, review, do data entry, and submit these cases online. The internship program also aims to develop the ability of the students to extract relevant information from varied sources, to triage the assigned cases into serious or non-serious, and process these cases by the industry standards. The additional benefits of this program, as they handle the full gamut of live industry cases, would be critical analysis, judgment skills, independent decision making, case assessment capabilities, case interpretation, data extraction abilities, data presentation, and medical writing skills, and business communications that you can share with the other colleagues, and you can cross exchange information. So it's actually a good exercise where you will have hands-on training within the actual database, oh, 24/7. So you will be able to review all possible types of cases. You will be more creative. You can do your assessment. You can triage these cases. You can code these using the Medra dictionary and process these cases. Next slide, please. So the 612 internship in Oracle Argus Safety Application is a 12 weeks of internship, which comprises of 8 weeks for ICSR, which means the individual case safety report, and 4 weeks for aggregate reporting. So an overview of these cases, the students will be working on serious cases. So by definition, the FDA has defined serious cases for the PV, pharmacovigilance specifically, any cases that cause death, life-threatening illness, disability, hospitalization, or prolongation of the hospitalization or congenital abnormality, they by default get into a serious category. Now, apart from this, there could be other scenarios where the events could be an important medical event, which can be categorized as a serious case. For example, cancer or multiple myeloma, anything that actually really causes some level of, degeneration or disability in a patient. At-risk cases are where the cases have been prescribed medication for an unapproved indication, for an unapproved dosing regimen, overdose, or for an unapproved age or population. So there are going to be some cases where you may think this is non-serious, but even though it's non-serious, the FDA wants to look at these cases, and sometimes the are not the drugs are given for a non unapproved indication. That means the indication is something else, but the patients are given this drug by the healthcare providers for some unapproved indication, and those are the cases that the FDA wants to look at. They want to see if there has been any unapproved, uh, use of like an off-label use of product. And all these off-label use adverse events are closely monitored by the regulators to ensure that the people are not using the drug for the unapproved reasons or indications. So the lack of efficacy cases are where the prescribed indication or the disease for which the drug is prescribed does not improve. So if the patient is using a drug for a specific indication, it's expected to show some level of improvement. But many times the consumers or the health providers may come back saying, oh, I used this drug for so an indication, but it's not working. So by the definition, by default, these cases, you're obligated to report the event as lack of efficacy cases. So even technically, there's no event here, like a sign, like a last sign or a symptom or any other clinical entity. The lack of efficacy, it's by default itself is an adverse event. So these are the other type of cases that the regulators are looking into. The study cases are basically coming or originating from a clinical study for which a marketing authorization has not been obtained, cases where the drugs have been prescribed for compassionate use, cases where post marketing non interventional studies being conducted, also spontaneous literature cases such as published literature cases involving company products, adverse events, and then there's a last criteria, which is invalid cases. So as I mentioned, if the ICSR report does not qualify for an adverse event, if it does not fulfill the four criteria. So any of these missing four criteria by default will go into an invalid cases. But the regulators are expecting the manufacturers or the marketing authorization holders to go back and try to identify the fourth missing criteria, and to make a follow-up attempt at least to identify the missing criteria. So those are the different kind of cases that will be reviewed and during this internship. So it's a very thorough, very aggressive internship where as we highlighted earlier, 8 weeks for the ICSR and 4 weeks for the aggregate reporting. Next slide, please. So the highlights of the certification program primarily will just highlight that the instructors are all physicians. They come from pharmaceutical background. They are all professionals or PhD holders with a minimum of 10 years of experience in pharmaceutical industry, and they are currently working in pharma companies. The software tools that are provided for the certification program for PV, we do have the hands-on 12 plus weeks internship provided using the Oracle Argus Safety Database tool, which is the Argus 8.1.2, which is the most recent up, upgraded version of Argus. The internship programs, the students work as a drug safety associate. So the advantage of having this internship program is where the students get hired as, and they have been hired as a drug safety associate or specialist of pharmacovigilance. So all these are titles that are very similar and have similar role and responsibilities depending on the different companies. And so that's the advantage of having this PV internship where you can get into a clinical trial safety associate or a clinical safety specialist or an aggregating reporting analyst, which is also one of the roles and one of the demanding roles, in fact, uh, where you could be placed eventually. For the curriculum, it's a job oriented, typical role, 9 to 5, and majority of these roles, some could be remote and some could be with a hybrid model based on the COVID situation. And that's the advantage. It's a very typical corporate role, 9 to 5 or 8 to 5, I would say. And students will get access to the program content, batch recording, and tools after 1 year of program completion. So that's the advantage in terms of the curriculum, where you'll have access to the program as long as you're registered into the certification program and also 1 year post completion of the certification course. So the certification, there are two certificates. One is a course completion certificate and one is an internship completion certificate, which is provided to you after the completion of the internship. Also, the students are guided by the industry faculty members who have more than 15 years experience in the resume preparation, interview preparation, any assistance with LinkedIn profile or any advanced help that you would need or guidance. Also, we do provide them with references for the jobs as drug safety associate intern upon successful completion of the academic internship. So this is a nutshell highlights of the certification program. Next slide, please. So we also offer the Masters in Drug Safety Pharmacovigilance program, which is actually an extensive course for 2 years. So those individuals who feel that they want to do a thorough, proper master's program into the PV, we do offer that. So this program caters to the needs of the ever-growing, highly regulated industry professionals following a curriculum that is highly competent and alignment with the real-time requirements from pharma industry's point of view. The curriculum is designed for grooming healthcare professionals with strong background in fields like medicine, pharmacy, dentistry, nursing, biostatics, and information technology. And the master's program is structured to equip individuals with knowledge and skills needed for employment and career advancement. The total number of credits offered are 36, and the alumni who complete their graduation certificate programs can transfer their credits when transitioning to the master's program. So the master's in drug safety and pharmacovigilance with specialization in either medical and narrative writing. We also have specialization in regulatory affairs, advanced clinical trial management with CTMS and ETMF systems, signal detection, aggregate reporting with Oracle Argus. This is the most upgraded 8.1.2 version. So that's again a little bit of overview of master's program. Next slide, please. So the concepts or the objectives that it's going to cover and for the masters is basically the concepts of drug life cycle, which goes over the preclinical development and drug development process that I described earlier for the ADSP, regulatory compliance, pharmacovigilance risk management, signal evaluation and report. It will also cover the guideline and regulations for the drug safety and pharmacovigilance principles and operations, such as WHO guidelines, FDA guidelines, EU Good PV guidelines, CIOMS, ICH, clinical research processes and clinical trial management, training for the triage of adverse events and serious adverse events, project management, REMS and risk management plan, and also the hands-on 20 plus week internship training in clinical conductor tool and or ETMF for clinical trial management. So this course is very extensive. It goes above and beyond than what's given in the ADSP course. And if you need more details on this program, you can always reach out to the admissions department for further information. Next slide, please. So again, this is a nutshell of the highlights of the MS and DSP. Speaks about the programs that we offer. The software tools is pretty much Argus, but in addition to Argus, we have now the CTMS and ETMF tools that are in addition to, because we are covering the clinical trial management program as well. Next slide, please. So just a few recent success stories just to show how students have been graduating these certification courses and have been successful in getting in safety data associate or safety positions in-house in pharmaceutical companies. So we had a recent student called Suman Bala, who was a PhD in pharmaceutical sciences, who completed the ADSP in 2020, who has been recently placed as a safety data associate. So by education, he completed the MS in drug safety and PV, working as a drug safety associate. Currently worked as a retail pharmacist in India before moving to US, and then was hired as a Sanofi as a drug safety specialist in signal detection, started in April 2019. Also, Sunil K., who was a PhD in pharmaceutical sciences, worked as an associate professor in India, and then completed the ADSP in 2020, working as a drug safety specialist currently. We have one of the physicians, Rebecca John, who is an MBBS from Singapore and joined ADSP in 2019, hired as a regulatory post-marketing safety specialist. And then Karishma, who was again MBBS from India, ADSP was completed in 2019, currently working as a clinical safety reviewer. So there have been a lot of success stories, and we continue to have more and more students in last year or so, which we haven't received the updates yet, but there have been a lot of placements going on, as it's very easy to find a drug safety specialist role given the market of the PV and given that the number of companies are growing. And then we have some reviews of some students in terms of the ADSP courses, which is very helpful for the newcomers. So for any admissions related questions or eligibility criteria, we would request to reach out to the admissions department, or you can email or call them if you have any questions after this demo session for today. So with that said, we'll take any questions that you may have on this call today. Thank you. So feel free to put in the chat or speak during this call. We would like to help and address most questions that you may have tonight. I think there's a question in the chat. They're requesting this presentation. I'm not sure if Bhavna or anybody can respond from the admissions team. Any more questions on the actual curriculum, or any questions that you may have about the title or any specific role or responsibilities that may come to your mind? Please feel free to speak. Yes, so there's a question on the chat. Would this be an online course? Yes, so this is going to be 100% remote. Even in the last couple of years, because of the COVID situation, nobody was able to get on site because there's a home office in New Jersey, but this is 100% remote for those people who are on different coastline or away from New Jersey territory.
Hi, I have a question. I've heard about the MEDRA programming in pharmacovigilance. Do you cover anywhere that Medra programming along with Argus here?
Yes, we will be covering the Medra coding dictionary. As I said, we'll be speaking about the dictionary itself, how to use the dictionary when you receive these adverse events. And when you actually do the internship program, you'll actually be reviewing and coding these events using the Medra dictionary.
Okay, once we
So,
take this course, how long does it take for us end to end to get into a job, to begin with some entry level pharmacovigilance job?
Well, that's a very standard and good question out there. So, typically, we've seen students who are graduating from these certification courses finding a job within the span of 3 to 6 months. And again, as it all depends on how fresh you are and how you prepare your resume. So, we encourage students to start preparing your resume very closer to the completion of your courses. So by the time you're done with the courses, you're already speaking to the career counselors and you can line up with them uh, and start interviewing and be prepared for those questions. So
Um,
typically, as I said, the roles of a typical drug safety associate, we've seen placements within 3 to 6 months
okay,
and much
thank you.
quicker, even 2 months sometimes.
Okay, and another
Mhm.
thing, if I understand right, this program is completely dry lab. There is nothing wet lab involved here, right?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
This is completely based on the computer and there is no wet lab at all, right?
Yeah, exactly. This is all
Okay,
computerized. Yeah.
okay,
So there's, as I said, for those people who have not worked with computers, there's some level of data entry. Obviously, you'll have to do some medical writing part, and then once you get access to the Argus safety database, you'll have to be able to navigate the database because it is a database just like any other database. So you will have to learn the database
okay. And
basically.
if we have to put some effort in learning some coding or programming for this, what background will facilitate this one? What background like Java or Python or anything which is closely
No,
aligned
it's
towards?
very basic. No, not
Okay,
you don't need any IT coding.
okay,
It's very basic, and that's why, if you're coming from a life science scientific degree, it's basically a coding the event that belongs to the body system. So basically, if it's headache, it'll fall into a general disorders body system organ class, or it'll fall under neurological organ system class. So you have to
okay,
choose the closest term that makes sense based on the
okay.
anatomy of the body, basically. That's what it is.
Exactly, because I
Mhm,
don't have any programming background,
mhm.
but my background is life science, so I'm trying to figure out will this be a good match for me?
Sure, no, definitely. I would definitely recommend this because the advantage of this ADSP course, it's a short duration. See, many times you want to do a courses, you won't find anything that's less than a year,
Mm-hmm.
and this is all remote. And as I said, the course curriculum itself, as long as more only the new entity that's going to come for people who are all, I assume everybody has a bachelor's degree here and master's, whatever. So that's even
Okay.
better. It's very easy for you guys to
Mm-hmm.
just go through the most critical technical part, which is going to be the Argus safety database and getting familiarized with an adverse event report and how
Okay.
it looks like and how to capture the necessary information. And that's what is going to be their learning curve for
Okay.
professionals. Hmm. Sure. So we do see a lot of questions coming on the chat. Please be patient. I'm trying to catch up one by one. So one of the top questions from Madhuri is, I have a master's degree in biochemistry. Am I eligible for this course and how easy or difficult it might to get a job? Yes, Madhuri, if you have a biochemistry, you should be able to get advantage of this course. As I mentioned, it takes easily 3 to 6 months, depending on how passionate and how invested you are. Once you graduate, once we finish this certification course, you should be able to find an entry level as a drug safety associate. or senior specialist. So please do not go by the titles because these titles can vary depending on the different companies. The basic role is going to be the same. And it's always good to look at the job responsibilities when you apply for these positions. And that's why we do have in house uh, people who are going to help you, assist you in building up your resume and preparing for the interviews. So the next question is how long does it usually take to go from, I'm sorry. Okay, so how do you provide? What is the starting salary for this position? So the starting salary for the drug safety associate or drug safety associate, it's typical, and please correct me, anybody from the Solars Academy. What I've seen is for a consultant, it starts from 30 to 35 an hour. So it can range anywhere from 55K to 70, depending on the seniority level. And as you grow, obviously it's going to go up. But that's the minimal you can expect for a drug safety associate or scientist level as a beginning salary. So the next question is, um, I see that this course covers most of the topics. I'm curious to know if you'll need any specialization as well in a particular topic like signal detection or aggregate reporting. So that's a question from Asma. Well, the ADSP course we are going to talk about, we do have a module that's going to speak about the aggregate reporting, and that's the new addition we made based on the requirements on the industry because they are expecting folks even with the senior drug safety associate level to understand what aggregate reporting is, and that's why we've included aggregate reporting. You may not necessarily require signal detection. Just having knowledge of signal detection, what it means, and understanding how signal detection is done is enough for a senior or a junior drug safety associate level, if that answers your question.
Yes, that answers my questions, and
Sure,
Asma.
sure.
So, I have actually already done a short-term course of drug safety and pharmacovigilance, and I learned pretty much. They also gave me the access to the Argus safety, but I have not done the internship. But I have learned about all these modules. So, what my question is that do I need um, a, s- a separate certification for, let's say, if I want to go through aggregate reporting or I want to go through adverse drug reaction, reporting, or so do I need anything specific to get into the industry, or are they going to hire us depending on just the general information? And I do
Well,
have the hands-on
if
experience.
you've already done the basic course, and did you find an opportunity or
Essentials.
you're still?
The essentials. It says Argus Safety Essentials. So I learned a lot about Argus Safety Essentials, but I haven't done anything like in particularly deep studies of aggregate reporting. I do know what it is, but so do I need to go
Yes,
through
you know,
any
I
particular
think the current
certification?
demand in the industry because there are a lot of professionals. So if there's a candidate who has done aggregate reporting versus a candidate who just knows about aggregate, there's a difference, right? So we would
Yeah.
strongly encourage that you do this internship because that
Yeah. Can
internship
I
is actually
enroll
going to help
just?
you. Mhm.
Yeah. Can we just enroll into the internship program? Do we have anything in the Solace College to go through an internship program?
I don't think so, but I'll let this admissions team speak and confirm it. My
Okay.
understanding is you have to enroll in this ADSP course in order to access the internship. But Bhavna, anybody can clarify or confirm,
Yeah,
please?
sure. So Isha, how it works is ADSP, AR is a part of ADSP. So going forward, the schedule we'll be sharing later on. I mean, I'll maybe you can get in touch with the admissions team. The number is, mentioned on the screen out here, and they'll provide you more information about the program and about the AR sessions also.
Okay, thank you, Bhavna.
No problem.
So yeah,
Uh,
please reach out to the admissions team. I think they'll clarify, but my understanding is you you have to go through this entire curriculum. We do not just offer
Yes,
internship separate out of the bucket.
correct.
hmm So the next question is Solars has 150 hours and 300 hours of program in drug safety. Can I take 150 hours and be able to find an entry level job? So that's a question from Lakshmi. So the reason we started with the 150 hours, which is a basic um, DSP course, that is the drug safety pharmacovigilance course. So we began with the DSP course, and when we started that course, we realized some folks wanted to understand and wanted to get comfortable with the database. And that's why we started with the advanced drug safety, which actually has the internship. And what we've noticed in the last few years are those people who are actually going to the internship because you're actually dealing with life cases and the life environment of how you'll be actually working in a work setting. It's been really helpful for those people. So we would strongly encourage to go for the 300-hour session versus the 150, unless you have a budget particular. But in terms of job availability and able to find an entry level job, I think that's what we have been noticing. The ADSP has been definitely very much useful for folks. So the next question is, it's a okay, so that was addressed. How long does it usually take to go from a drug safety associate role to drug safety physician and medical director? Okay, so that's a good question. It does take a few years. Um, Again, Aditya, I don't know if what your background is. So if you're a physician, there is going to be definitely an opportunity to be hired as a medical reviewer, maybe in a couple of years. Even the medical reviewers, even the physicians have to typically start an entry level position. So I know it can be a little frustrating, but that's the only way to go for foreign MDs. So typically the MDs are also doing the same job, basically what the other scientific professionals will be doing as a senior safety associate, because that is the basic expectation and that is going to be your basic in responsibility day-to-day activities. But once you go from there, it typically to get to a medical reviewer role, it may take 2 to even 4 years. So you may have to move around different companies. Again, that's another way of growing in pharmacovigilance. When you move around companies, you are basically exposing yourself to different medicinal products, and there is an opportunity to grow. So once you are comfortable with your basic ICSR case processing or aggregate data, then you can look for triage positions because most of these triage positions or triage physician roles are the expectedness is that they require a physician. And obviously, once you, in order to go into medical director role, it may take 7 to 10 years because the typical expectation you can grow into an associate director within 5 years. So there's really, I mean, I'm just giving you the time space, what I've noticed within even my colleagues. That is a traditional time, what we've noticed in the industry in terms of the titles. Hope that answers your question. And yeah, I think I did answer all the questions from Aditya. So the next question, I think, I'm trying to see if I missed any questions out there. So,
Yeah, so I could see, Dr. Shabana, there is one question. I think Christine, she wanted to ask if we provide the PDF of this session. So just to answer that, we don't actually provide the PDF, but tomorrow, of course, we'll be sharing the recording for the session. So with that, if you have any questions, you can reach out to student services team or the admissions team. The number I have already mentioned the student services number in the chat box, and the other ones are already there on the screen for the admissions.
okay, okay, thank you. Yeah, let us know if
Okay,
you
thank
missed
you.
any questions out here or if you may have any additional questions. As I said, the salary is a good question. It's a very standard question that we receive, and the salary goes up. For the medical reviewers, the salary can go up from $65 an hour to even 200 an hour. but in order to get that 200 an hour, you're probably need 15 years of experience. So regardless of whether you're a physician or a PharmD or a nurse, even senior managers make 100K plus or even 140K plus. So it all depends on your passion about this and how you what is your career goal down the road in order to get into, because there are a lot of opportunities. The starting point is always a drug safety associate, but you can always be a senior manager even with a PhD degree. If you have a good leadership skill set, then that's how you're going to be a leader, and you're going to grow into a director, senior director roles eventually. And then obviously there's a global safety officer role, which is a very standard title for physicians, where you are actually overseeing not just one product, but multiple products uh, in safety. So there is definitely a lot of advantage as you uh, get to know into different companies, and also as you kind of dive through from the operational part of pharmacovigilance to risk management. Again, there are risk management positions out there where you can be a risk pharmacovigilance associate or specialist. So there are a lot of diversions within pharmacovigilance depending on your area of interest and your expertise that you can move around and kind of build your future on that. Any more questions? I think we've addressed most of the questions in the chat. Let me see. I think that.
Yeah, I could see a couple of more, Dr. Shwana, in and around how we are providing the
Okay.
study material or the PDFs or
Mm-hmm.
the notes. So just to answer it, so I mean Microsoft Teams. So after you enroll, we provide, the LMS for us is Microsoft Teams. So we provide the credentials, wherein there would be a specific credential for each students with the password, and with that you can access all the class material, all the recordings of the class, whatever class happens. So we provide the recordings on the very next day, it gets uploaded on Microsoft Teams. So that's how it works. Other than that, we also have like a physical binder, so there's a separate cost for it. I mean, in case for the ones I'm talking about, for the ones who actually enroll, if they actually wanted to place the order for binders. So there's a separate additional cost for it. So that's the class material that we offer.
Yeah, as
And
Bhavna mentioned, all these the lectures will be recorded. So in case you missed any lecture due to any reason, you are able to access these lectures.
yeah, so
Thanks,
Owen for
Bhavna.
the no problem. Yeah. So Owen for the program cost, you can reach out to admissions team. The number is right here mentioned on the screen. 848-227-4151.
So I think the next question is, if you do not have a science background, what prerequisites do you recommend? So that's the basic requirement of bio-life science degree. So if you do not have any science degree, then we do not encourage you to, um, you know, with this course, because that is a prerequisite for these courses. You, I'm not sure if there's any other courses other than for any non-scientific background degrees that Solars offers. So I think we've addressed most of the questions, and I think one of the questions is, how long does the internship include the 6-month course duration? Can somebody from the admissions answer that question, please? And there are going to be some quizzes at the end of the modules, which is super easy. It's not complicated. And there's going to be a final exam as well. So if you have any questions about the quizzes or any kind of more specifics about the curriculum, please reach out to the admissions at solars.edu. They should be able to answer your questions. Okay, so if no more questions, we thank you for your time and attendance, and we look forward to seeing more of you joining the courses soon. And thank you for your time. And please reach out again to any of the Solar's team. We'll be happy to reach and address your questions even after next few days if you have any questions. Okay. So thanks, Solars, and thank you, everyone, and have a great evening. I think somebody missed the first few slides.
Yeah, Radhika, so we'll be sharing the initial slides that you missed out on. So we'll be providing the recording tomorrow. Our admissions team will be sharing the recording for this session, and you can refer to it. And you know, with that, if you still have any questions, you can reach out to admissions team or to the student services.
Okay, there's one more question, Bhavna. What is the last date to register for the new batch?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we are closing the admissions very soon. So I would request Himangi to, get in touch with the admissions team on the number mentioned out here on the screen, 848-227-4151. So they'll be the right one to give you the exact last date.
Okay, so the earlier, yeah, so the earlier the better. That's the
Yes.
answer to you, Mangi. Okay, so thank you everyone, and hopefully we've addressed and answered your questions. And we look forward to seeing you. And thanks, Solars. Have a great evening, everybody. Take
Thank you,
care.
Dr.
Bye
Shwana.
now.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you so
Bye
much.
bye.
Bye. Hmm.